are aware of who we are, but just in case somebody is coming in and watching this on the YouTube link, we want you to be able to know why we're here. We monthly meet trying to discuss and understand the Linux operating system and its environment so that we can use our computers with greater freedom than is possible with the proprietary kinds of software typically offered by Microsoft Windows and Apple OS. It's not that we inherently dislike those things, we just appreciate the ability to do things with less corporate control. And that's why we meet, so that we can talk about what works for us and hope that others will learn from our experiences and appreciate some of the nuances that come up in these meetings. I'm going to share my screen and we'll take a look at the available agenda. And you should all be seeing the NatickFOSS user group meeting as illustrated. Okay. Don't think anybody is unaware of what we do at this point. So, as is common for our online meetings, we've been skipping the FOSS introductory slide talk. And we get on to the FOSS news right away. Unfortunately, it begins with obituaries. They got put in at that location in the FOSS news as the first and second and fifth or sixth item. We have a couple links here to the description of Elwood Edwards, who died at 74 and was the You've Got Mail for AOL's mail service. I don't remember hearing that for quite a while because that was, I think, a Windows kind of activity. And it's too bad to think, well, those times have passed. As Firefox turns 20, Mozilla is pondering how to restore its former glory. This article talks about the need for Firefox to be a focus of Mozilla, the company that controls Firefox. I'm getting feedback here and it's making me a little confused. I'm sorry. I'm not sure whose microphone is feeding back through speakers. Generally, we ask that people mute unless they're about to make a comment. So if all others temporarily could at least mute, we won't get the feedback from anybody. And I'll mute likewise when it is someone else's interest in speaking. So Firefox turning 20 doesn't mean that it is everybody's choice. This article clearly indicates that it has a little bit of a confusion because Google, the current dominant browser company, has decided that to get Firefox to use Google's search services, they will pay Mozilla a fairly large fee that Mozilla can then invest in development on Firefox. But they do have an intent to expand their collaboration with other organizations and companies. And maybe that will work out for all of us so that Google is not sort of competing against itself with the Chrome browser. It has taken over being the number one browser, with the Microsoft offerings kind of holding a lesser position. Anybody in this group use Chrome as their exclusive or primary?
I do.
That was Jerry, I think.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yeah, and Vivaldi is Chromium based.
And I use Chromium itself.
Mm-hmm. I'm a Firefox user only because I'm used to it and I do like it a great deal. I got involved with it early with Linux. I guess it was the default browser back in the day when I started using Linux, and just never felt the need, except for these meetings where I use two different browsers, one to be part of the meeting and the other to share the screen. I've found that works out better for presentation process. Dick, you have your hand up, or Jill?
Yes, I had a question about if Google is taking over Mozilla's so that people can use its search engine. Are they going to freeze us out from using DuckDuckGo?
I don't think so. I think it's just that Firefox has income from Google in order to make it the default search engine, but you can use any search engine you want to point to.
Well, it currently is the default search engine. If you just install Firefox, it comes up with Google, and then you have to go in and change it. So I don't
Exactly.
sounds like it wouldn't be any change at all.
It wouldn't what?
It would not be a change because it already is the default search engine.
Right. Google has been paying Mozilla this money for quite some time in order to have that default status. Bob?
Oh, I misunderstood. I thought you said it was a new thing. Sorry.
Oh, no.
Mozilla has gone back and forth with Google. They have at times used DuckDuckGo as their default. They have at times used Google search as their default, and they seem to be coming back to doing this, as you say, for financial reasons primarily.
Now, and as a corollary, there is a Department of Justice article that I just read that says that Google has been that the Department of Justice has asked a judicial body, a judge, I'm not sure what level, to disconnect the browser, the search engine from Google, and that Google should therefore have to sell its browser Chrome to somebody else. I don't know what effect that will have on the issue of Google giving money to Firefox, but it's a connected issue, I think.
Probably not, because of all the changes that are going to be happening in the Department of Justice.
That's another story altogether, that's for sure. Okay, I'll go back to my shared screen, and we have a new, or not new, I guess, but a distribution of Linux software and the tools associated with being system administration as a focus. And this article was nice because it points out that if you have a goal that is very singularly focused, you can probably find a distribution that focuses the way you want to. And this is catching the attention of people who want to do system administration across a whole bunch of computer systems. And this distribution focuses on finding the best available tools for doing the job. At one point, this would have been very helpful while I was a district computer coordinator for a school district. We had tools like this that we operated for our Windows machines. But if I were a current user, I might be looking at this operating system distribution as a new way to get control over the many dozen computers that we had in classrooms and at teachers' desks and in the administrative wing. Has anybody used this particular thing? I'm looking at you, Jerry, a bit.
No, I'm not a control freak. No, I've never used SysLinux.
Okay. Bob, how about you?
No, my home computers are actually not networked. I still use the old sneaker net because I've only got 800 square feet here. I don't have a whole school to cover.
That's a good point.
I do know some people who do run networks, and some of them are trying to get them to work with Linux. So this might be something to recommend for some of them.
It might be worth taking a look. I remember that one of the things that we routinely had to do at the end of the day was to make sure that all the systems had been turned off for the night, so we didn't waste electricity overnight. And as I left the building 7 or 8 o'clock at night after the majority of people had exited, I'd run a script that went out and checked everybody's computer had been disabled for the night. I don't remember what that tool was, but it was one of the most useful things because there were at least 10 or 20 computers that had been left on with the monitors turned off as the teachers and students left in the afternoon. Okay.
Yeah, one of the people I know of is doing a series of meetings which also focus on Linux, where he is talking about setting up a NAS and or a home server. And this is something that would fall into that category. And he may not be aware of it.
Yeah. I don't think it's necessarily the best the best distribution out there. It's just that all the tools are integrated within the distribution, and that makes it easier to get a start. That's something that you can do on your own. Of course, Linux is infinitely variable. Well, I better not say infinitely. That goes a little too far, but it's functionally capable of running almost every tool that's out there if you know about the tools. And I guess the group behind this operating system behind this distribution has the skills to know what tools to recommend and build in.
I mean, it looks like it'll be simpler to use than Proxmox, for example, but this is only a few components, not the entire server.
Mm-hmm. Okay, here I see just a moment or two ahead, the Department of Justice article here. If that interests you, you might want to read that. I don't think I'll click the link. And Radio Free Fedi, meaning Fediverse, has a streaming service that is shutting down by January. I've never used it, but it recognizes that the Fediverse which is Mastodon and a multitude of other programs, servers, and clients who share a common protocol. And Radio Free Fedi was a streaming service that was built around focusing on the Fediverse musicians, and it's probably too soon to know if somebody else will jump into that space. I guess it was quite a bit of work to run a streaming service. Did somebody raise a hand? I heard a beep.
Yes, I did.
Oh, yes. Okay. Ed.
Yeah, from what I was able to determine, the service didn't have enough people to run it because it's very labor intensive, and the person that started it had some help, but it just wasn't enough. And there had been an attempt to transfer the operation to another organization, but it fell apart.
I might point out that several, or perhaps most, of this month's agenda was contributions from Ed, so I hope he'll chime in where I stumble over something that he intended to talk about. That's one of the things that we are, as a group, trying to expand, having more and more of our agenda items suggested and recommended and then added to our agenda each month. Sometimes I think a topic is interesting and it turns out that it's only interesting to me, and I'd rather not have that be the situation, since Dick and Jill have let me become the face of this organization, trying to replace Dick's work over many, many years since we started. I find that I sometimes stumble along because I don't have the breadth of knowledge that he did. In any case, thank you all for your contributions, and feel free to join the discussion mailing list. If you're not aware of it, go to our homepage at NatickFOSS.org. The homepage will show you all the necessary steps for getting involved with the Discuss mailing list, which allows for submitting new topics and general discussions during the time we aren't having a meeting. And that's most of the time, as it turns out. I see that mailing list as a great tool that we have put to use since it was set up, thanks to Jerry. And if you are making contributions there on your own or asking questions, thank you very much. And if you haven't yet taken a look at it, please do. All right. Back to the agenda page here. Jack Whalen. Oh, I almost missed out on the second of our obituaries. Thomas Kurtz, the co-inventor of the BASIC, beginner's all-purpose something, instruction code, something. I've forgotten the exact acronym this represents, but it was a true open source offering from the inventors. Kemeny is the other author. Kemeny and Kurtz.
You got it correct.
Oh, good for me. It was the first language that I learned on my first personal computer, the TRS-80 Model 1. And I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. I learned how to do the programming language by reading the David Lean manual that was designed to come as a kind of an add-on to the original computer. It didn't come with that manual. It came with technical stuff, but the BASIC was built into that computer because it was free. It wasn't something that everybody had to pay for. And for the history of it, BASIC was written to be used by universities, and the good work that our friend at Microsoft began was to convert the BASIC language into a form that could be used on more computers than just the ones run by Dartmouth, the larger mainframes. And he took that BASIC and sold it to several companies, including, I believe, the TRS-80 people back when Tandy was Radio Shack. And others joined, including the original Microsoft computer, the original IBM PC Model 1. It allowed all of us with those early computers to do work right away without having to find a language that worked. BASIC was there for all. Didn't take any effort to get involved because those computers popped right into the prompt for BASIC, and we told the computer what to do in the terminal, which was also BASIC, and that was really quite cool. I think it's very strong good to remember Thomas Kurtz, and I'm not sure I remember Kemeny first name. Anybody out there do?
You know, I forget.
Yeah, memory.
I used to-
Yes, go ahead, Jerry.
Yeah, I first used somebody's got an Echo Deck. I first used BASIC back in 1965.
Mm.
I had learned Fortran, and I think it was my junior year, maybe my senior year, but I think it was my junior year. I learned Fortran 2, and then we had a GE time sharing system they just brought into school, and I started using that. But more interestingly, when I was at Burger King had really screwed up on their taxes on some things. And I had to go in, I had to write a whole bunch of basic systems to restore the the basic tax information that went back like 7 years. And my boss actually asked me to do it. They wanted to use BASIC because they had a time sharing system. And I was the only one on his staff that actually had used BASIC. So I ended up doing a major project for Burger King to fix the tax issues that they had had. It was a case really where an operator several years prior had mounted the wrong tape, and nobody caught it.
Oh boy.
So they went and did that, and we used BASIC commercially. We had a time sharing system. So I had to go over to the computer terminal, which was on another floor. It was actually in accounting. And I was the only one in my staff that had an MBA too, so it made it easier. And our accounting manager was a lady, Esther Reed, and she kept a battle axe on her, or no, she kept a whip on her door. And she was a really tough cookie. She liked me because I was Jewish. She was kind of like my grandmother there. But that was actually an interesting project. because I do a lot of things in BASIC that I hadn't really done before.
I know that it's still possible to run BASIC, but it's not generally done. Most people have converted to other interpreted languages. The largest current one I know of is Python, which is more expansive than any BASIC version that I know of, with more tool sets available to it, you might say. Bob points out it's John Kemeny. So now we have the full Kemeny and Kurtz. I don't want to focus on the fact that he's died, but on the focus that the two of them made a potential for some of us, at least, to become interested in computers. I am not sad that they did their work, because I loved all my experience and still do, I think. All right. We did the, hand up. Jill, Dick.
Surprise, it's Dick. Back in the year 0.03, when we were working on computers, but they were much too expensive and big to take home, Radio Shack announced this TRS-80, fondly known as Trash 80 ever since. And we looked at the price. You could start for $600 with a full up and running computer. And then you could add things to it to make it a more competent one. And it came with BASIC built in. We looked at each other and said, if this works, maybe we won't be commuting to work anymore. And indeed, Miller Microcomputer Services started as being the local place you could get help when you wanted to learn how to use your TRS-80 better. We knew the local computers, the local Radio Shack stores, and they had our cards for people that were looking for a little extra help. It served us well, and after a year or two, a friend introduced us to Tom Dowling. Tom was our fourth expert, and he wanted to talk to us to get some help getting his fourth up and running on the TRS-80. We very happily gave him a TRS-80 to work on, and we became a great partnership. He was a part of the action, and with fourth, not as good for beginners, but wonderful for making a small computer act larger and faster. And he just started turning out every app that we had, but it wasn't going all that well, in fourth. And they were a great hit with the small part of the Radio Shack crowd that knew about them. We got featured in some magazine articles and such. And we went through a few transformations and eventually found Linux and so many good apps that we didn't need a language to program in. That was very nice. We've been there. And we owe a lot of thanks to BASIC for not being quite good enough for our needs on small computers. And as a result, giving us a business that has made it unnecessary for us to commute to work for many, many decades. Thank you, BASIC.
Jerry, you're up next.
Yeah, I will agree. But I think BASIC can be, a lot of complex stuff can be done in BASIC. But Forth is another language. I was working for Raytheon Data Systems back in 78 to I think 82 or something like that. And we were going to do, we had a new computer that we were using as a controller. And we wanted to put in a bid, a government bid, and we needed a high level language on that computer. So we looked into BASIC. And actually I called Dick Miller because of Dick was was doing BASIC and selling BASIC. We ended up hiring BASIC Incorporated, and when they actually converted the communications on using Forth actually ran faster than the code that was running in I think C at the time. It was, but again, BASIC is not for your average non-programmer. I mean, Forth.
It's not.
I think Jerry meant Fortran.
I meant Forth.
Oh, Forth.
Forth is not for your average programmer. Fortran can be.
So many languages, so little time to learn them. Okay, I'm going to zip back to the screen to find that Jack Whalen in this article was, I think, from Ed. If you want to see what Linux is going to be like for the next year, this article is, I guess, the place to start. Jack Whalen is a writer for the ZDNet magazine, and it is unfortunate, but ZDNet is one of those places that has multitudes of messages prepared. We have attempted to warn everybody by putting the markers onto the agenda that say, watch out, oh, there's another pop in the little screen. We cannot avoid those things while we try to give you good information. We recognize that some of you are users of ad blockers, and they may or may not take care of all of these things that pop up. But Ed, I think this was your addition to the agenda. Did you see any particularly notable predictions for 2025 when you read the article?
There might have been a couple. Let me see if I can find it.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead while Ed searches his coffers for the information he wanted to highlight there. One of the things that is also of note is that the kernel contains different file systems. The file system is really software at a very low level that controls how storage works on your hard drive or your solid state storage drives. There was for a time a very up and coming file system called the Riser file system. But at one point, this man who wrote it, whose name was Riser, killed, I think it was his wife, and it put the whole
Hans Riser. Hans Riser.
Hans, first name.
H-A-N-S.
Yep.
He's sitting in prison right now.
And among other things, that probably cooled the development of it. It was touted as a pretty good candidate for a next generation sort of file system, as there have been many coming along. But it's been removed. It's official. The author is not only in prison, his work has been, as we call it, deprecated, taken out of circulation. So don't expect to be able to look forward to a riser file system in the future of Linux computers, I guess.
Yep. Riser FS was at one time the default for SUSE Linux.
Okay.
It had some nice leading edge features, but lack of development and support when it became persona non grata made it unsafe to keep in a kernel.
Yep.
So don't kill your wife if you want to have your work stand for longer than a minute or two. That's good advice anyway, of course, not just for this situation. Ed, did you come across anything to add with the what to expect from Linux?
Yeah, I put a few things in the chat. It's his predictions are like reaching a 5% market share. There'll be a bigger ecosystem for gaming, and AI will not be a factor.
All good things as far as I'm concerned. We have an uphill battle making Linux be mainstream in large proportion because of the dominance of Android and Microsoft. But those of us who do use it, we love it, or are at least mostly happy with it most of the time.
Android runs a Linux kernel.
And what was that?
Android runs a Linux kernel.
Yes, it does. And I admit to using the term running Linux as meaning the operating system built around the kernel being the Linux core that operates between software and hardware. Hence, it's being called a kernel that mitigates between disk drives and microprocessors and the software that runs on top of them. We appreciate the operating system built around that core, but we don't necessarily recognize all of those parts as the operating system. We default to calling it Linux instead of perhaps GNU/Linux, which is the preference of the Free Software Foundation. And there are others, as noted by Jerry, like Android, that don't even mention Linux, even though Linux is the kernel at the core of Android. And you'll find in our future here, a couple of links down, there is something called the Fuchsia, Fuschia operating system, which is a new core, a new kernel. Martin, you've got a comment.
Yes, I just want to add that there is actually a term for Linux, the desktop, called free desktop from the freedesktop.org standardization process. So people that wanted to refer to, say, for instance, if you wanted to talk about desktop Linux specifically as being its own thing, separate from servers, separate from cars, separate from Wi-Fi routers, you could actually be more specific and say it's a free desktop. And it's not just words, it's not just a brand, it's actually things that comply with the freedesktop.org specifications. So for example, Chrome OS isn't a free desktop because it doesn't comply with the freedesktop.org specs.
A very good point. Unfortunately, the battle of names from Linux to GNU Linux to free desktop is confusing to users who sit down and say, what operating system do you use? Oh, I use a Hewlett Packard.
Right.
I use a Dell. And you ask them again, what operating system is on it?
I tend to think of these terms as being like what do they call those terms of art, right? So like people who are inside the industry have these terms of art so that we can be very specific with each other about what we mean. But when it comes to actual brands that consumers are using, they're going to be imprecise, yes, and also probably going to be surface level. And a lot of that is just like who they actually deal with to provide them with support and or like the thing that they see when they log in.
So we talk on and we marshal our forces and we use terms as clearly as we can, trying not to confuse by simply mentioning a term and not defining ourselves. It's an ongoing battle that we will continue to fight, I'm sure. Okay, we've already come to, oh, not quite. There's another article, The End of Chrome OS. That's an operating system that is designed for use beyond the browser. It's not Chrome, the browser. It's an operating system that was designed so that computers could be sold that were not using Windows, not using Apple, and not specifically using a Linux distribution. Apparently the Google people who are the sponsors of Chrome OS have decided that it's done. Google faces competition, and while they are a giant company, they don't like to waste their resources on something that isn't going to sell gangbusters. If you have not used a Chromebook, you may not have encountered Chrome OS specifically, because it's not quite the same as Android. I know Bob has definitely been a Chrome OS or Chrome person. Do you have any comment to make on this, Bob?
Chrome OS differs radically from today's Linux, but in ways that we may see in another article, where we're talking about immutable operating systems and how they have two root systems which update each other and form some resiliency in the event of an error or a flaw. And so they're very error tolerant. Chrome OS is notorious for its security, but that's done by lockdown. However, this is exactly what you want in, for example, school computers, where kids have a tendency to experiment. And you may want it in some workplace environments, and you'll definitely want it for a kiosk. But instead of Chrome OS, there are many, many possibilities, as my items indicate, for what might come next.
Please expand.
Google decided not to continue their Project Treble, which would have put Android onto x86 architecture. However, this has not stopped a for-profit company, and I would like to be able to share this one because it's an interesting thing about this for-profit company. I have a tab open. It's Bliss OS.
Let me jump out of sharing briefly.
And then I will try to manage a share. And I will try to do the entire screen because that works best. Click share. Have we got it? Now, this one. Is everybody seeing BlissOS for PC? Now, the one
Yes.
problem, yeah, the one problem is that the company that is doing this is for profit, and therefore this is not free. However, there is Android x86. I'm sorry, this BlissOS is free. It's an open source project. So BlissOS is an open source project that's been going on for a while. And from time to time, it makes a little progress. It's not a complete project yet, but they're working on it. Android x86 is the one I was talking about with Esper, which is a for-profit company. And theirs is non-free. It's fairly affordable. And they are still developing it. This was as of to their blog about what they're up to. One of these is the article about the Fuchsia OS, which we will be hearing more about. Has it been turned into a microkernel, and is it going to be used in Android? Stay tuned. I believe there was one other thing that I did link to Project Treble. Let me show Project. This same article from Esper mentions Project Treble right here. It's one of the headings. Google tried to re-architect Android with Project Treble. Then they went over to Chrome OS for the Chromebooks. And that was running both on x86 and on ARM. And that's interesting because Linux at the time wasn't running on ARM very much. It could be run on ARM, but it was very difficult. So I think I will stop my share at this point because that's all I wanted to summarize. So there are many alternatives that are being developed. Yeah, there are many alternatives that are being developed. And there are some that have been abandoned along the way. I wonder what Google really will be doing, especially with Fuchsia.
Time will tell. In many ways, as we look at these, the desktop metaphor is going to be less important for a lot of people. Many of my relatives very rarely use a desktop tower style mini behind the monitor kind of computer. I almost exclusively use a laptop. It happens to be an x86 style, but a lot of the relatives only use their phone. That's it. They don't really use a laptop or other desktop format because they're on the go. They're always doing something and can't lug around a laptop except when they're in class doing some kind of official sit-down sort of work. The phones, the little watches that everybody has, those are operating system tie-ins that are definitely not a desktop kind of format. So all these different experiments will have their day if things work out. I'm going to go back to my share of the window with Firefox and back to the kernel here, the agenda. We've had some FOSS history, even though there isn't anything under that heading. Sometimes headings do actually stay blank because nothing particular seems to fit there, but we did quite a bit on Kemeny and Kurtz with their basic, talked about the history. That could have been here instead, but it isn't. And we're looking at the future here. Last month, we did not get the chance to cover Ubuntu 24.10. Dick, are you available to talk about that today?
I am, but in a limited manner. The reason is we've been great fans of Ubuntu Unity in particular for many years.
Mm-hmm.
One brilliant young fellow doing a great job with Ubuntu, making it even nicer. Linux Mint caught us, and I think by this past summer we were pretty much across into Mint. And I can report on these, but I can't report a lot of personal use. There's a third one in the list, and that's Ubuntu 24-10 LTS. And I believe they've upped the long-term support to 5 years. So that's a lot of a solid system. Ubuntu Unity, I believe, was doing the same thing. I can't say I know whether it's hatched yet. So that's my quick update on it. They're good, they're solid, and I guess I'm still using a lot of them while I'm using Linux Mint.
Thank you. Bob?
2410 isn't an LTS, but 2404 is.
Right.
And there's probably been an update to 2404 LTS.
I think
I personally use one of the Mint derivatives, Linux Mint Debian edition, which eschews the Ubuntu components completely. But that one is not being updated, whereas Mint was updated from 21 to 22. And I had some experience with that. I may have discussed it a little bit in here. And I did show the update process. And I did find out one other thing. There's been some regression in support for the NTFS file system. Trying to do trim on a USB connected drive that has an NTFS partition. The Linux partitions do trim or unmap or discard, but NTFS doesn't seem to any longer, which is okay because that's supposed to be done by Windows anyway.
Okay. The knowledge is amazingly vast here in this group. I appreciate that. Okay.
I was actually forced to use Ubuntu 2404 in order to compile Inkscape, because the new versions will only work on the newer releases. And eventually I ended up moving to Cosmic Alpha 2, which I can report is definitely not ready for use. It has many, many holes. So I think if I was to recommend a desktop today for like the most modern GNOME experience, probably Fedora. Honestly, if you can get past the installer, and then Ubuntu a second.
That's a good recommendation. We have several people who are Fedora, not fanatics, I won't say that, Fedora fans. Okay. Back to my agenda screen. The limitations of Wayland as a display technology, a treatment of how you deal with the GUI. It's a replacement that has been in development for quite a while. NVIDIA is the manufacturer of video display cards and graphic GPUs, graphic processing units. So they have a very good handle on what can be done and what needs to be done. This article I did not bring in myself. I'm not sure who did, maybe Bob. Maybe Bob or Ed. Anybody know what this set of limitations is all about? Well, apparently none of those present are prepared to talk about it. So I'm going to recommend that we research that article and come back to it next month when we have had a chance to digest its contents. Fedora KDE desktop spin. Now I'm a KDE desktop, which means Plasma from their perspective, Plasma being the term they prefer rather than KDE desktop, excuse me, as opposed to GNOME, which has been the standard for Fedora for a very, very, very long time. They are bringing forward the KDE desktop, the Plasma desktop, to be at the same level of importance in their work. And that may make me interested in actually doing a Fedora desktop exploration, because I'm a fan of the KDE Plasma desktop and all its tools. I use that as Kubuntu right now. I don't dislike GNOME, but a lot of the features that I come to rely on are KDE Plasma features. I'm very comfortable doing what I do with them. So if Fedora is an advanced modern operating system flavor or distribution that tends to stay up to date, as Martin pointed out, I may jump over and become a Fedora KDE Plasma person. And if you are at all interested, you may want to take a look at this option for yourself as well. Anybody actually tried it yet? I have not.
I did actually try the KDE spin. I've been joining a different community video chat, which is the Fedora KDE community. They have these little monthly chats, and they got me to try it as a spin, and it's actually pretty good. I didn't decide to use it as my daily driver.
Most of.
Sorry, should I get a bit closer?
Nope, I'm hearing you, but it's network traffic is breaking you up for me. Not sure if that's true for everybody.
Okay, I'll quickly repeat. I tried the KDE Fedora spin because of a recommendation from another community video chat where the KDE Fedora guys get together, and it's a pretty good desktop. I ended up not choosing it for my daily driver, but I could actually honestly see a technical person using it for their desktop.
Okay, thank you. The GNU image manipulation program, GIMP is what it is referred to by most people, although there is a large cluster of users who very strongly object to the slur associated with that same homophone, meaning GIMP, not GNU Image Manipulation Project. has come forward with a new release that is in release candidate number 1 form. That's the stage right after beta. Beta being while it's in heavy testing, release candidate being the want you to look at this because the next release or the very soon coming release will be a full version, and 3.0 is what it's going to be called. Unfortunately, I don't have the skill that I would like to have with this image manipulation program. Anybody in this crowd a regular user of it can comment on how 3.0 changes things for the better? Well, apparently not. I'm hoping that it will continue to be as good a program as it is. I know that it has a relatively steep learning curve, but many programs with that many features do, because the features are so numerous that you need to know how to use all the basic ones before you can go to the combination of 2 on top of each other or 3 in a certain sequence. That is true of my favorite image manipulation program, Inkscape, which Martin knows quite well. I do not know the Inkscape as well as I would like to know it. And it's not a substitute for the GIMP, which is a raster image manipulation program, meaning all those pixels, the little dots of color all over your screen, are manipulated by GNU image manipulation programs features, where Inkscape is designed to use language known as SVG, scalable vector graphics, working with descriptions of an image that get drawn at your needed resolution as needed. And I like that for a lot of reasons. I don't use it to the extent it's possible to use. And actually, the 2 programs work with each other reasonably well. You can do some things with one that you can't do with the other, and then merge the results and come out with some pretty fancy combination features and effects and results. And if we have anybody that would be a proponent of the GIMP, it would be neat. But apparently we don't have anybody in our group that is that user. Dick uses a similar program for his image manipulation program that I'm sure he'll speak about right now.
Yes, big fans of Photox. I'll just give you a quick update on the news for it. I think Photox might cover all the bases. It sure does for me. And it tends to be somewhat smaller and faster if you have a constraint from the computer. I think it's a little smoother in terms of learning it sooner. And it recently changed its name. You can't hear the difference. It changed from FOTOXX to FOTOCX. And that was because they were getting other people horning in on use of the name online for things that were getting confused with it. So it's now Photox with an X. And it's at release 24.70, with a new one coming out fairly soon, I think by year end. And love it. Very good stuff. So take a look at that too and compare. It's leaning on the GIMP, but doing something a little different out where your fingertips are.
One of the problems with the XX ending had to do with people looking for porn.
Not exactly the same as
XX.
the slur of GIMP, but similar. Okay. We have lots of... Yeah, go ahead, Martin.
I wanted to offer a quick apology for coming to this month's meeting instead of last month's meeting when you actually talked about Inkscape, because we had a release last time. So thanks for talking about the stuff that we do in the free software world, because we put a lot of effort into making releases, and it's good to know that people actually spend time digesting like what's new and getting involved.
Excellent. Bob?
Just a second. Yes. What Dick was saying about the fall update to Photox, it's actually out. It was in November. And I got it. And I find that, at least from the point of view of the interface, there have been some improvements. And I think the functionality has improved a bit. It's a little quicker than it was, a little more powerful, if you've got the hardware for it. But it can also run on much lesser hardware.
Okay. It is good to have different programs available for similar functions, just as it is good to have different versions of the operating system so that people can get comfortable in the way they want to. That's one of the great powers of Linux free desktop. It does not constrain you to a single version. It gives you the opportunity to build your own garden, to plant the flowers that you want to grow, the different versions of a tomato plant that you want to see in your fall harvest, heirloom and or modern versions. And that is one of the things I think those of us who use it on a daily basis appreciate most. Even if we don't experiment quite as much as some other people might, we appreciate that there are users getting exactly what they need, or near enough that they can say, oh, this is the feature that's missing, and speak to a developer or a forum that developers read and say, if this feature existed, I think my life would be just fabulous. And sometimes the developers get that information and put it to work quickly. I believe that Dick has contributed for the development of Photox many times, and as a result of his recommendations, changes maybe came out 2 or 3 days later, and he was able to pick up those changes with the new version released. And of course, Martin has a comment and is exactly that kind of developer. Go ahead, Martin.
So I think it's worth thanking you, Albert, specifically because you're one of the people that I actually watch, because you do post sometimes about Inkscape and using it. And so watching what you're doing to figure out like where there might be problems, especially with new versions, is incredibly useful for a developer in the free software world, especially when the goal is not to just have fun, but to actually serve users. And in the end, you have to be able to listen.
Listening is not necessarily my strongest suit. I tend to talk more than I should, but I appreciate the opportunity to listen to expertise when I get it. And that's one thing I love about this group. There are a lot of different viewpoints, each one having the chance to express their personal experience, even if they don't think it's expertise, it turns out to be the little tidbit that I needed, because I consider myself mostly a user and I want to be able to be comfortable with the programs that I use. And the ability to give feedback is one of those things I think is vital to this ecosystem that we call the Linux operating system. It works, as several people in this group know quite well. Dick, Jill?
It's Jill. I think you mean ecosystem as opposed to ecosystem, because we don't do the echo stuff here.
Unless we're not using headphones.
Well, all right. I'll take your pronunciation as the standard then. Ecosystem.
I'm actually going to steal the word ecosystem. I think it's a great word.
You have to be standing 55 feet away from something to get a true echo. So
Martin with an H.
ECHO, yes. Okay, back to the agenda screen, he says. Oh, wait. I hear a hand. I see a hand. Dick, Jill?
Hi, it's Dick. I just remembered something, not Linux, but I have a hunch after this meeting, it might be of great interest to others as well. We will be attending online for an interesting lecture. Instead of going in to the aquarium in Boston for the live lecture, if you're interested in deep sea science and technology, you might want to catch it. I'll send the link along to Algod or Fan It Out or both. But it starts at 6:30, I believe. And I thought I'd mentioned it before. I forgot to mention it.
If you put the link into the text, everybody can get it faster.
Put it in the chat.
Good.
Yep. I don't know that I said chat, but yes, that's the right place, Jill. Thank you. Okay. Hot software indeed. We've had a very good set of comments about these things. LXQT, which is a lightweight version of, I think, a KDE related desktop, having a Wayland session component. I'm not sure who posted either of these next two. I think I hear a hand coming up. Jerry?
Yeah, Qt is the underlying graphics for that KDE uses,
Right?
where GTK is the underlying graphics for GNOME and stuff like that. Qt is based on C++, where GTK is based on C.
One of the things that I think we need to do, and I try, as we talk about these things, there are so many terms that overlap and link. And those of us here may know the context, but I sometimes think, wait, I need to get those links in my own brain, as Qt is the underlying technology of Plasma and KDE's software, just as Jerry pointed out. But if we just left it at Qt, or cute, as I've heard it pronounced as well, it might not be obvious when we needed it to be. So I like to try to get those terms clear. Okay. Did anybody want to speak about the Wayland session issue there? I'm not familiar with either of these two articles. Okay, the Fedora 42 article. They're going to port the Anaconda installer to Wayland and default to Anaconda's web user interface. Was this you, Ed, that brought this to us? Are you there, Ed?
Yes, I'm here. I'm looking that one up. Yeah, I added a lot of stuff, so I'm looking up that article now. Yeah, I know they had been working on a web-based installer for some time now, and it looks like this is what it's going to be. You know, when I last installed Fedora and 40 and also Rawhide, which is their development branch, that still had the original Anaconda. It wasn't web-based.
Okay. So you haven't tried it yet?
No, I have not. I've both 40, which was upgraded to 41, and Rawhide, I've been running off little external solid state drives, and I got to tell you, they're pretty versatile. I haven't had any issues with them. Plugged into USB, boots right up.
Sounds great. Love to have you give us a thorough demonstration of that information at some point. I know you've been talking about it on the discuss list for a while. And if you could come up with a demo that worked effectively to talk about how you came through all the problems you've encountered, it might make other people's experimentation easier.
Well, I off the top, I can tell you that I attempted to install multiple distributions to these solid state drives, and the only ones that would successfully install and boot are OpenSUSE and Fedora.
Mm-hmm.
The Debian installs failed. I also tried KDE Neon, and about maybe 85% of the installation, it runs a command, and there was no response to that particular command after 300 seconds or 5 minutes, and then the install just stops right there. And I was never really able to use that. So at least on the external SSD drives, the USB variant, you know, it's been OpenSUSE and Fedora.
I think you suggested that there was a hardware kind of lock-in to the primary disk drive of the computer you're on, and the installer probably is expecting only to install on that primary hard drive rather than a secondary. Is that your basic route?
Yeah, that with Debian, yeah, that was my thought originally. But the strange thing is that if I threw in a SanDisk thumb drive, I've got the Cruiser Glides, Debian installed perfectly. So why it went to it installed to the thumb drive but not the external SSD? No clue.
We've done discussions in the past about using virtualization for the install of secondary operating systems to explore. That's a way I have done it myself, but that's a little more hardware intensive. It requires that you set up a virtualization first and then figure out how that all works before you can plug and play, as it were. And it sounds like your method is the way that would make it easier for a person to experiment with working systems as opposed to simply live systems. Because right now, to experiment with Linux, we typically put in a thumb drive into the USB port and boot into a live image, which by itself lets us explore, but typically does not leave us with a really functional operating computer running that piece of operating system software. Really sort of a temporary experience rather than a long-term option. So the virtual install works well as long as you have a big enough RAM to handle all the work. And your method would be nice if we could get a generic external hard drive install process going. Then you could just plug your hard drive in to a computer and run the system using that one instead of the local hard drive.
Well, that's basically what I'm doing with these external, SSDs. I've got 3 of them. One has OpenSUSE slow roll, which is still, it's been out about a year now. It's still considered experimental, and it is a rolling release based on Tumbleweed, but it updates slower, hence the name slow roll. Like when they get security fixes, those get pushed out immediately, but the larger updates, like say an upgrade to KDE Plasma or something like that, those would run about once a month. And I've got Fedora 41 and Rawhide on the other 2.
And your experience running them is as if you were just running on a computer. Once you started, it's running from the external SSD just as if it were inside.
Yep,
Is that
exactly.
it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
the
sounds
hard
cool.
drive. Yeah, the hard drive inside this, the desktop I'm on now, it's still the original from when I bought it in 2011. So it's almost 14 years now, and it's still going. It's a Western Digital. I think it was Caviar Blue back then. How long it's got, I don't know, but it's before, well, 14 years now. It's still going.
Sounds like my old Apple IIs that we used in classrooms for 14 years, just like you. Wow, that's cool. All right, on we go before we get too stuck on anyone. Plucky Puffin. That sounds like next year's not quite long-term support version is Ubuntu's daily build. I have a feeling these are pretty early in their development. We have just recently had October's release of the Ubuntu 24.10, but now, as is typical, they are doing the development phase for the next one that will come out in April. And that is, if you're going to do testing, these are the beta builds of sorts, maybe the alpha builds of Plucky Puffin, which is the way Ubuntu's releases are identified by some cute name like that. Ed has his hand up. Yes.
Yeah, I think that the daily builds could be considered alpha or in a pre-beta state. But if somebody wanted to actually test them out, I think it's safe to say that you'll probably find bugs in them, because that's how a lot of the early alpha stuff is.
As would be expected, because as you develop new software that has to play nice with other software, the term I think is regressions tend to appear. What used to work depended on some older library of software that you have updated with your new activity that you're trying to promote for the new release. And when the conflict occurs with the old software, you got to fix it before you release it in beta even. Martin has lots of experience with that as he develops the new features for Inkscape. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Martin.
We actually rely so much on user testing simply because there are so many workflows and things that users do we may not even be aware of about how the software is being used, that really when we break stuff, a lot of the time it's users that come to us and say, hey, in the alpha or the beta, this is broken.
Thank goodness for those bold enough to do testing. Okay, where am I? Here. Okay. Plucky Puffin is a future. A man sick of crashes sues Intel for allegedly hiding CPU defects. This sounds like something, and is definitely not hot hardware, but very interesting nonetheless. I mean, it belongs here in hot hardware because we don't have cold hardware and lukewarm hardware topics. But apparently, it is this user who has said, Intel, get your hardware act together. Stop putting defects into your hardware, into your chips, into your central processing unit CPUs, hiding them, not telling us about them, and making our lives bad. I would not want to be a hardware chip developer. I have watched enough videos about people doing their own boards to know that they need to go through 3 or 4 iterations of board development to get it to hook up properly to a Raspberry Pi. And then all of a sudden, another defect comes to light, and they're just doing these things as hobbies. So 3 or 4 iterations are hard for a hobbyist. I can only imagine the CPU developers like Intel and AMD, among others, ARM people, all the thousands of little tiny, tiny, tiny wires that are supposedly inside those CPUs. Good grief. Somebody raised a hand. Jerry.
Yeah, I just had to unmute. Yeah, long ago, early in my career, I worked right here on data systems, which no longer exists. And we were always complaining that we had to fix problems with the CPU in software. But another thing that I learned back then, being the first time I worked with a computer manufacturer, which Raytheon was at the time, is that you can't easily or cheaply go and fix hardware problems in the field. So if you can fix it in software, that's faster and cheaper. And that was before the internet at the time. It was actually early in the, just before the internet. But, it's true. I see that with a Tesla. One of the beautiful things of driving a Tesla is they can fix things over the air that that are available that are maybe bugs in the hardware or stuff like that. But all hardware ends up having some bugs, and so you've got to fix it or work around it in the software, the firmware.
The movie War Games demonstrated the dangers of leaving a computer open COM ports, though.
True. We should all be aware of problems, and maybe this lawsuit will bring the issue more to the public's view, if nothing else. I don't know anything about this particular article as well. All right. Last month, we had hot internet using FOSS tools to ID the source of an online photo. Dick, how are we doing on that one?
I have several short announcements, most of which attached to that. It's got to be postponed till next month.
Very good.
The reason is quite interesting. I tend to use back in time for my external backups. And we were thick in doing a lot of changes and decided to make two backups, one before and one after. And late last night, I set up for the first one. And back in time comes with two options as you load it. One is back in time. The other is back in time, paren, root, close paren. I've been tending to use root. I got some sound advice that said, don't use root, use the non-root one. And after I did that for quite a while without noticing much progress, I decided maybe I better interrupt it. This morning, I confronted the difference and went back to redo it in the root version after having properly interrupted and stopped the non-root version. My computer, maybe 4.5 hours later now, is still doing that backup. This is something I expect. I've got a lot to back up, and I expect it. Only the changes get backed up on this kind of a incremental one. And maybe 15 minutes if it's big. 4.5 hours and still going? I don't think so.
Well,
my conclusion for people who are going to get in the same boat right after me is if you're using one, don't switch to the other. It apparently regroups everything to begin. I've just done that twice, or once and a half anyway. And I hope I get my computer back soon so I can demo what's on it.
well, I just looked at it while I was checking that phone call, and it actually did.
Is it done or not?
No, it's not
Okay.
done, but it did say that it was working on one. It blinks it off and on, so it's hard to
I mean,
say.
it's still working.
It's still actually working. I was thinking that it was just hung. But
I think this is a good lesson to mention quickly while I'm confronting it. And as a result, you'll get the demo from my laptop next month, everything being well. I have another piece of information. I think you've heard about a really interesting talk at the New England Aquarium at 6:30 tonight. I seem to remember hearing that from somebody a little earlier. It's posted on the chat section. So grab it there if you might be interested, and you can read it later.
And since we had to register for it, hopefully they will let you go on.
I think you may not be able to get into the one at the aquarium any longer, but I think you'll have no problem on the sign up and get aboard. Anyway, easy to find out, and it starts at 6:30. I think that's everything on my learning every day list.
All right. Thank you, Dick. Jerry?
Yeah, I developed a Python program to display the source of online photos and stuff like that for the Federal Public Defender's Office in Boston. I don't know if my son-in-law actually gave that over to his co-employee because he left, but it was completed before he left the Public Defender's Office. But I also have a graphical tool, and it's on GitHub. I'll see if I can find it and maybe add on to that demo.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. On Hot Internet continues. For those who have any interest in the Fediverse, which is, again, a federated microblogging area, along with other things that have been using the common protocol called ActivityPub. Someone recommends that we use a Unicode character that is known as the asterism, which is 3 star symbols, aster, star, arranged in a little triangle, because any image that you want to use doesn't fit in text very well. So if you want to refer to the Fediverse in text, they recommend using the asterism, which is Unicode 2042. I have no problem with that. If you don't use a computer very often, you hold down the Shift and the Control key at the same time while tapping the letter U, and then continue typing 2042 and return or enter. That will produce a Unicode character in any tool that uses Unicode. Most word processors do. Most other programs that have word processing concept involved allow you to enter them. If you don't want to use it, don't use it. It's all right. And continuing with the Fediverse, one of the developers behind the ActivityPub protocol, Christine Lemmer-Weber, has done an extensive analysis of the new federated Blue Sky setup. Blue Sky is a semi-offshoot from old Twitter, developed by one of the people that used to work for Twitter with Twitter's support before Elon Musk took over Twitter and changed the name to X. And this analysis is lengthy, and if you need to understand decentralized systems as a concept, this article, this blog entry is very much worth reading. I don't think I'll go through it because it is very detailed, but it's worth a good read if that area of understanding interests you. On a simpler note, Hot Internet images of biology information as images is available from the National Institutes of Health, NIH, These are public domain images of a lot of different kinds of biology, cells and viruses and parts of the body. Anybody recognize this one? This is your quiz for the day. Where is it? Oh, that was just the header image. Oh, I'm sure we all recognize the mouth.
Are these in
Right.
SVG?
There it is, the human kidney. I tried to scroll faster and I missed it. I hope you didn't cheat and use the word. Thank you, Ed, for chiming in so quickly. All right, if you need those images, they are available both as PNG along with vector graphics that you could plug into Inkscape and develop some nice images for your schoolwork, for your grandchildren and your children, depending on your age. Make worksheets, make discussion images, and you don't have to pay for these in any way. So you just click until you get where you want to be. It tells you what it is, the licensing information, and the types of files that you can get here, showing that you could download all of them. One that is for Adobe Illustrator, one that is for embedded PostScript EPS, this PNG, as I mentioned, which is the standard raster graphic, and finally SVG. So you just simply click on one of these and it becomes a file that you can embed as needed. They have done this mostly, I think, for medical documentation, but it's nice to know that it's there and it's public, and that if you want it, you can become a producer of neat stuff. A draft emoji list for the 25-26 release. Unicode is characters that you can use by the coding method I mentioned just a couple of moments ago, typing Control-Shift and U followed by a code. There is a list of new emojis that you can embed in your writing when this becomes supported by the software you use. Note that Unicode is an expanding ASCII, ASCII, American Standard for Information Interchange, 215 unique characters back when there were only the old teletype machines for producing everything you needed to produce on a computer. Predated even the monitors that we called CPUs, no, excuse me, CRTs, computer,
Cathode
ray tubes. Thank you, Jill. I have to bring these things out of the depths of my memory. Sometimes that's slow. But as time passes, we continually add the things that people want to be able to type into their documents, especially with phones. And Unicode does its best as an international effort to keep up with the requests that people make. The asterism is a code, just as the capital letter A is a code that's embedded into a whole bunch of different fonts. But the emojis are not typically there, but have been added in the past 10 years or so to the Unicode standards. And this is a list of the new ones, the proposed new ones anyway. Okay. I don't need you to look at that right now. We need to find out a little bit more here in the next 10 minutes about Google's Gmail decision. Ed, I think this was yours as well. What's the big deal here?
Well, the the article was updated since I added it to the agenda. What it was saying is it was updated because there's malicious images being sent to Gmail users as attachments, and they're finding that they are evading the existing security measures.
Ooh.
And they're also, it also indicates that they're narrowing a security and privacy gap between Android and iPhone. What Apple has done is they're allowing their users to generate like a temporary email address. So it doesn't expose your actual email address, and it looks like Google is going to try the same thing. If I'm not mistaken, if somebody is paying for Yahoo Mail, which I think is called Yahoo Mail Plus, I believe a similar feature is available.
Sounds like something to keep track of. Okay. The Global Privacy Control is an article in draft form from the World Wide Web Consortium that would allow people to ask in their browser for companies that they visit online to respect a whole set of privacy requests that my data. If you are interested in saying to a vendor whose site you visit online, you want to be able to tell that site not to share anything about you, or to share only this, only that, only the other. And that is related to the cookie pop-ups that say, what things do you want set for your cookies rules? And I think this privacy working group has made a proposal that would automatically take your set of requests, your set of limits, your set of requirements, and put a standard message into the protocol HTTP that is the standard for web, and allowing it to also be involved in the descriptive language of the document model of a browser web page, that would convey those automatically, so that you really would only have to set yourself up with a set of limitations once or twice, or maybe periodically every 6 months if you wanted to change your settings. I haven't read the full proposal, but it sounds like it's worth following up on and being aware of, because this would certainly make it a lot easier for all of us who are security conscious or want to be security conscious. And that would give you control at a more granular level, overarching a bunch of different websites, rather than having to answer for every single website you ever visit, or not being able to ask for restrictions. Third-party cookies, third-party attacks, third-party who knows what. And wrapping up, we have a brief look here at artificial intelligence to run on a Raspberry Pi to allow for local testing of large language models without getting involved in setting up cloud servers and all that kind of business. I have not set one of these up, but again, this was to introduce the concept for those who might want to experiment with large language models and artificial intelligence without getting involved in a much more overhead heavy set of requirements. And finally, Massachusetts high school that is Hingham went to court because it was it asked their students not to use artificial intelligence, chat GPT and things like that, to generate a rough draft, which they then submitted as a homework or an essay assignment. The student was punished for doing it, and the court has said Massachusetts, the Hingham High School did not violate that child's rights. It expects personal work to be done by the person, not by ChatGPT. That brings us to the end of the official agenda. Anybody have any last comments that they want to add? As we're approaching 5 o'clock in our 2-hour structured meeting. We have had a effective meeting, I hope. There are a dozen or 13 people in attendance, which I think not our record, but close to a high point. I want to thank all of you for coming and participating, whether you said anything or not. Thank you, thank you, thank you. These meetings are an exciting part of my month.
Bravo.
Okay, good night and happy holidays to everybody.
Happy holidays to all of you too. Yes, good point.
And a reminder that the January meeting is on the second Thursday.
Thank you, thank you. I meant to mention that and it slipped my mind like many, many other things do. We omit the first Monday, the first Thursday because of holiday timings 3 times a year, and January is one of those times. We don't want to be crowding around the New Year's holiday. So thank you all for your attendance. This meeting is recorded and will be online thanks to Dennis and his YouTube channel. We appreciate that and all the effort put in every day of the week to understand Linux and the operating systems around it. See you all in January.